Chapter 4 The Watcher in the Night. That night, and the two that followed, Xana stayed over at Deeba's house. Just then, she preferred it to her own place across the yard of the estate. Her father was in a bit of a state. The police kept asking him to tell his story again, and telling him there was no sign of the chemical spill he thought might explain the smoke that made him lightheaded. While he had to deal with the questions, Mr. and Mrs. Moon gratefully accepted the Resham's suggestion that Xana stay with them. The police had also asked the girls what had happened, of course, but Xana and Deeba couldn't explain what they didn't understand. "She's had a real shock, Mrs. Resham," Deeba heard one officer say. "She's not making a bit of sense." "We have to make them believe us," Xana insisted. "What?" said Deeba. "Magic smoke came out of the drains? Think that'll help?" Bex had broken a couple of bones, but was recovering. So, at least, Xana and Deeba understood. Bex herself wouldn't speak to them. She wouldn't see them when they came to the hospital, nor would she answer her phone. And it wasn't just her. Kath and Keisha ignored Xana and Deeba at school, and wouldn't answer their calls either. "They're blaming me for what happened," Xana said to Deeba, in a strange voice. "They're scared," Deeba said. The two girls were sitting up late in Deeba's room, Xana in the fold-out bed. "And they're blaming me," Xana said. "And maybe they're right." In the next room, the Reshams shouted at the television. "Idiots!" Deeba's mother was saying. "They're all fools," her dad said. "Except that environment woman, Raleigh. She's all right. She's the only one does any good." The Reshams were still having the conversation, the same one they had many times, about which politicians they disliked most, and the much more rare species, which they liked, a short list of one. Much later, when they went to bed, Xana and Deeba were still whispering. "It must have been an accident," Deeba said. "Something with the pipes." "They said it wasn't," Xana said. "And anyway, you don't believe that. It's something else. Something to do with..." "With me" was what she didn't say, but what they both knew she meant. They had the same conversation every day. There were no conclusions they could come to, but there was nothing else they could talk about either. They talked themselves out, and eventually fell asleep. Much later, in the small hours of the night, Deeba woke, quite suddenly. She sat up in her bed by the window and pulled aside the curtains a little, to look out across the estate and try to work out what had disturbed her. She watched for a long time. Occasionally a figure might hurry by, following the tiny red glimmer of a cigarette end. At this time of night, though, the concrete square, the big metal bins, the walkways, were mostly empty. On the other side of the yard she could see Xana's flat, its windows dark. The wind turned corkscrews in the courtyard, and Deeba watched a bit of rubbish turn. It was raining a little. The moon glinted in puddles. In the far corner was a pile of full black rubbish bags. There was a tiny scratching sound. Deeba thought it must be a cat, searching in the rubbish. There was quiet, except for the fingertip drumming of rain and the whisper of waste paper. Then she heard it again, an insistent scritch, scritch. "Xana," she whispered, shaking her friend awake. "Listen." The two girls looked out into the darkness. In the shadows by the bins, something was moving. A wet black shape, rooting in the plastic. It moved toward the light. It didn't look like a cat, nor a crow, nor a lost dog. It was long and spindly and flapping all at once. It extended a limb out of the shadows. Something glinting and black fluttered. Xana and Deba held their breath. Shaking with effort, the claw-winged thing hauled itself through shadows, spidery and bedraggled. It approached Xana's house. It huddled in the dark by the wall, leapt suddenly up, and hung below the window. The two girls gasped. The thing was just visible now in the faint lamplight. It was an umbrella. For a long time it hung like some odd fruit below the window-sill, while the rain increased, until the watching friends began to tell themselves that they had imagined the motion, that there had been an umbrella hooked on the ledge for hours. Then the dark little thing moved again. It dropped and crawled with its excruciating slowness back to the darkness. It opened its canopy a little way, gripped the concrete with a metal point, and dragged itself along. It was bent, or battered, or bent and battered, or torn, and it crawled like something injured, into the shadows and out of sight. The courtyard was empty. Deba and Xana looked at each other. "Oh, my God," whispered Xana.
"That was..."
squeaked Deba.
"Was that an umbrella?"
"How's that possible?" Xana said.
"And what was it doing by my window?"